September 11, 9 AD. There are only a few of them left. What was once 20,000 men is but a few weary, injured, and exhausted hundreds. They were the pride of the empire, military veterans who had brought victory for the empire everywhere their legions roamed. Yet in a matter of 24 hours, years of expertise, military might, and inspired command had been leveled. Germania Antiqua was supposed to be Roman, part of the ever-growing empire. But in just a few hours, the Germanic tribes have left 3 legions abandoned, wounded, and on the run. Some 4 days later, these wounded remainders stand surrounded and doomed to death, unsheathing their swords, ready to fall on them. There are fates worse than death, and many being captured by Germanic tribes. Neighboring Germanic tribes and Romans would clash many times over the century, from the 2nd century BC to the 8th century. One of the Roman Empire's most significant traits was its expanse and military dominance. War and reprisal between its neighbors was an inevitability. The pantheon of battles and wars between the Germanic people and the Romans has led to stories of brutal combat, fearsome acts that may seem barbaric by today's standards. While it's likely some of the accounts were exaggerated by Roman writers, tipped in their favor, the centuries-long combat between these two sides speaks of imperialism, identity, and territory relevant today. Today, we dive into the most vicious side of the Germanic tribes and why the Romans learned to fear them. Welcome to History on Fleek. Battle of the Teutoburg Forest, the beginning of an end. An incredible snapshot of the centuries-long warfare between the Roman Empire and the Germanic tribes is the Battle of Teutoburg Forest in 9 AD. Ultimately leading to a victory for the Germanic tribes, the Romans would label the battle the Varian Disaster. Taking place at what is now called Kalkrisa in Lower Saxony, a 3-day battle would ensue, riddled with underhandedness. A rare alliance of several differing Germanic tribes enabled a successful ambush of Roman legions, led by Germanic chief Arminius. Where the deception in the tale lies is the story of Arminius. In something of a Trojan horse tale, Arminius had gone as far as acquiring Roman citizenship and even military training from the Romans. This gave Arminius the means to deceive the Roman command and know the Roman legion's movements before they'd even taken place. This seminal battle took place during the attempted expansion of the Roman Empire into Germania under Augustus, and would prove a remarkable turning point. After Teutoburg Forest, the Romans would abandon their plans of bringing Germania under their control, while future empires Tiberius and Germanicus would retaliate with successful campaigns. Another century would pass before the Romans would make a major incursion on Germania. In just 4 days, the entire complexion of the Roman Empire would be altered, with many attributing the failed conquest of Germania to the downfall of the Western Roman Empire. In just 4 days, 3 entire Roman legions would be laid to waste in a region they thought was theirs for the taking. The nightmare begins. Publius Quinctilius Varus led 3 Roman legions, 17, 18, and 19 on the campaign through Germania Antiqua, starting in the Teutoburg Forest. On September 8, 9 AD, the column of these 3 legions trekked its way through the dense forest in the morning. This is no small amount of soldiers, mind you. This was 3 legions, some 20,000 soldiers, making up a column of 9 to 12 miles in length. It was late in the morning, making their way through a pass. Varus's column was at its most stretched and likely amid heavily boggy or frozen ground when they first came under attack. Arminius's Germanic forces were of equal measure by historical accounts, some 20 to 30,000 strong themselves. In a flurry of coordinated attacks from fortified positions on higher ground, the Roman legion were swamped with javelins, lances, and fire arrows. This was the first attack of the day. The column of 3 legions was split and irreparably damaged. From their lower position, the legions were unable to take any kind of defensive positions, and the Roman loss of life was in the several thousands. Varus had no choice but to take the remaining soldiers to the west to retreat. Akin to many battles with the Germanic tribes, the Roman legions had suffered significant losses. Day 2 and 3. The illusion of escape. Part of the success the Germanic tribes under Arminius found was their use of barbarian tactics. What you and I would know as guerrilla warfare, using tactics like carefully utilizing an ambush or hit-and-run methods, was the bane of the Romans. Masters of military organization and priding themselves as the superior armed forces of the world, being undone with a well-timed hit-and-run or unpredictable ambush was an anathema to them. Barbarian tactics were viewed as uncivilized by the superior Romans, but their effectiveness and power during the Varian disaster would prove their judgments misguided. Having his legions hemorrhaging losses, Varus took the remainder of his soldiers towards Osnabrück to take rest. They would camp on a hill come the second night, likely taking the lesson of higher ground from their traumatizing encounter earlier. Varus would guide his troops through torrential rain, very much to the detriment of the cavalry on the third day towards Calcrisa Hill. Yet the nightmare would only continue for the Roman general and his legions as they walked straight into another trap set by Arminius. Another ambush meant further heavy losses and walking into walled and further fortified positions by the Germanic tribes. Organizationally, the Roman forces were at a loss in the thickening mud and rain-soaked terrain. Cavalry and infantry would clash within their own ranks amidst the chaos, just trying to organize attacks. To add further terror to the Romans, many writers state that Arminius' forces grew at this point. Several Germanic tribe members who were not part of the ambush, hearing and seeing its success, had decided to join the fray. For the fallen Roman soldiers, their outcomes were only grim. Part of Germanic tribal custom was paganistic rituals, including human sacrifice. Roman soldiers downed by Germanic forces would be drowned, strangled, and even subject to ritualized stabbing. It is written by Tacitus that Roman officers used as sacrifices by Germanic forces were cooked in pots and had their bones used in religious ceremonies. The best a fallen Roman soldier could hope for at the hands of Germanic forces was to be enslaved or potentially ransomed. The end of the road. Most historical accounts of the Battle of Teutoburg Forest have the fourth and final day reported as a living nightmare. Varus and what remained of his battered and shattered surviving forces went towards the Valley of Ems on a road they were familiar with. The elements were not on the Roman side. Reportedly, violent winds and ever-worsening rainfall only added to fatigued and exhausted soldiers. Moreover, there was no escape, as Arminius' Germanic forces only followed the remaining soldiers in the direction they fled. So dire was the unfolding situation that Varus' second-in-command, Numonius Valla, would abandon the remaining column. Taking the cavalry with him, he attempted to escape, only for the Germanic cavalry to catch him and take his life shortly afterwards. Arminius' men would storm the Roman remainder and butcher the remaining Roman forces. These were not naive soldiers. They knew their opponents, and they knew their likely gruesome outcomes. Germanic tribes were prone to displaying the bodies of the dead they'd slain. Bodies hanging from trees or structures were common results of their battles to serve as trophies or warnings to others. Following the battle, Roman officers who surrendered or were captured were nailed to trees, beheaded, or burned in wicker cages. Knowing what was ahead, many Roman soldiers, including Varus himself, fell on their swords to take their own lives and spare them this. This was an unanswerable 4-day onslaught with Germanic losses minimal, whereas the Roman losses were 20,000. Aftermath: an empire never the same. It is no exaggeration to state that the loss of 3 entire legions considered to be veteran military units disturbed the Roman cultural psyche significantly. Romans were disturbed as much by the terrifying barbarism that befell these legions as the statement their losses made. What had built so much superiority and might in the Roman identity was its continual military conquests of any invaders and surrounding neighbors. So this open slaughter at the hands of neighboring tribes was an unexpected and painful wound. Emperor Augustus is famed to have hit a period of mourning. Some accounts detail him as going ungroomed for months, not cutting his hair or beard. Others have him banging his head up against the walls of the palace. All accounts have him wailing the words, "Quintilius Varus, give me back my legions." As for the proto-Roman territory east of the Rhine, it was suddenly up for the taking. Following their victory, Germanic forces made a rout of every Roman fort, city, and garrison. Commanded by the nephew of Varus, Roman forces fell back and only tried to hold the Rhine. What the Battle of Teutoburg did for Germanic tribes was gild their strength and confidence. Not only did they make quick work of the Roman forts and garrisons, they grew in strength and became significantly more organized. Roman territories were there to be overturned. Raids and even settling in Roman territories began to happen in increasing regularity. Entire Roman towns would be ransacked with their goods stolen and inhabitants enslaved. In truth, what the Varian disaster meant for the Romans was a loss of reputation. a loss of idealism, a sense of superiority wounded, never to be recovered or recaptured. The Roman Empire, in the eyes of its surrounding neighbors, could now be taken on and overcome. The Battle of Teutoburg and the actions of the brutal Germanic tribes meant Roman rule would never be the same, and is regarded as one of the most important events in the empire's history. This is History on Fleek, and we'll see you next time